So this is the first webinar in a 4-part series about creating accessible presentations. Today, we're just going to talk about getting started. My name is Megan Selmer. I am the Web and Usability Assistant at the National Network for Equitable Library Service, or NNELS, and I am a part of the Public Library Accessibility Resource Center, or PLARC project, which is Accessible Libraries, the website. Joining me today are two amazing, awesome testers at NNELS, Melody Shee and Toby Duggan, and they will be providing demonstrations later on in the presentation. I have a couple quick housekeeping rules, not rules, but keeping notes before we get started. So this is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. We have enabled the built-in Zoom captions if you would like to use them. We will have a short question period at the end of the presentation. So if you could hold your questions until then, it would just be easier for us. And also try and limit using the chat to just questions, just because excessive chat notifications can be really disruptive to screen reader users. And we are going to stop the recordings before the question period. So there we go. So I'm going to start today with a land acknowledgement. Our presenters today come from across this land, living and working in what we now know as Canada. We respect and affirm the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples and will continue to honor the commitments to self-determination and sovereignty we have made to Indigenous nations and peoples. We respectfully ask for you all to take a moment to acknowledge the lands on which you reside. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get started. So first off, this webinar series is going to focus on 3 main presentation programs: Microsoft PowerPoint, Apple Keynote, and Google Slides. I know there's a lot of different options out there like Prezi and Canva. We just won't have time to cover everything. However, the guidelines that we talk about in our presentations will be applicable to those other options. For those other options, some of them can be quite inaccessible to screen readers. So we recommend that you have like an HTML format or an accessible format of those presentations for anyone when you're working on them. Okay, so to begin like accessibility, you want to start with a good foundation. So with this is like selecting an accessible theme or template. In PowerPoint, you can search for accessible templates, like Universal Presentation and Geometric Presentation are both accessible templates. I will note quickly that those have just been tagged with the word accessible. So when you search for them, they are most likely accessible, but they haven't been like reviewed. But they're a good starting point. Unfortunately, you can't search for accessible templates or themes in Keynote and Google Slides. So following the recommendations in this webinar and the following webinars will be very helpful for there to create accessible presentations. If you want to work in if your preferred format is Keynote or if it's Google Slides, but you want that accessible presentation template, you can export PowerPoint templates to those other programs. So we have the directions on here. So to open a PowerPoint template in Keynote, you just go File, Open, File Name, and then Keynote will open a PowerPoint presentation. To open, and then same with Google Slides. And then the reverse is true. So if you want to open, if you want a Google slide into a PowerPoint, you can do that as well. Okay, so we have our presentation theme. We've selected an accessible one. So now let's talk about layout. So the first thing is that all slides should have a unique title and heading. So this is really important for a couple of reasons. One, screen readers use the titles to navigate through the slides, and titles visually organize the information. We also say that they should be unique. This is particularly important for like navigation by screen readers. Like if you have, for example, library collection as the title of 3 slides, that's can be really confusing to go through, right? So yeah, so it starts with having a good unique title and heading for each slide. Then we also suggest you use the pre-formatted slide layouts provided by PowerPoint, Keynote, and Google Slides. This is great because first, the title will be correctly marked up if you use the pre-formatted slides with the title option. Also, using the pre-formatted layouts mean that the slides will change screen size quite well. So like if you're opening it in an iPad versus a huge desktop computer, they will adjust quite well. For the slides, we suggest you limit the amount of text on each one, which can be visually distracting. And for the last point, we're going to talk about it a little bit more next week, but you need to ensure that each slide, the reading order is correct. So for this example, so when a reading order is incorrect, a screen reader will come to a slide and it can read like the page number or the slide number first, and then the text, and then the title, right? So that means that the reading order is not correctly formatted. We're going to talk about how to check that and fix that next week. All right, next up, color contrast. So you've got the layout down. Now, when you're picking your fonts, colors, and your background colors and your design, you want to consider color contrast. There should be a high color contrast in both the design and the presentation of the font. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, state that the color contrast ratio should be at least 4.5 to 1. So the higher the contrast, the brighter, the better it is. The color contrast ratio is a measurement. It's calculated you compare the brightness or luminescence between 2 colors. So on this slide, it would be like the black of the fonts versus the white of the screen. And then you would compare those 2 colors, and that's how you get the ratio. I'm not going into math because quite frankly, there's a reason why I'm not a math teacher. So, but that's just how it's figured out. So for example, like I just said, the black text on a white background is accessible. It actually has the highest color contrast ratio available at 21 to 1. But light gray text on a white background, depending on the gray that you've selected, it can have anywhere from like 1.3 to like 3. Like it's not very readable at all. So to determine what contrast ratio your slides have, you can, there's a bunch of checkers, like contrast checkers out there. So we've listed one URL, contrastchecker.com. WebAIM has a really good one. Yeah, there's a bunch out there. To use these, you need the hex codes of the presentation of the colors. And so I can just quickly talk about how you do that. Hit up my notes. So in PowerPoint, to check, say like, I'm just going to go through it with the font, but it's similar for all the different colors. I would select the fonts and then go up to the toolbar, and then in PowerPoint, you select more colors. And then if you're on a PC, a pop-up comes up and there's 2 tabs. If you select custom, that will give you the hex color of the font. It's a little bit lower in the pop-up. If you're on a Mac in PowerPoint, a pop-up will come out and you have to select the color slider option. And then from the drop-down menu, you have to select the RGB slider. And that will give you the hex code at the bottom of the pop-up there. In Google Slides, it's a little bit easier, one last step. So just select the text, go to the text colored icon on the toolbar, and then click on the custom option, and that will bring up the current hex code color of the font. And then in Keynote, it's kind of similar to how you check for the hex code in PowerPoint and on Mac. You click on the color wheel from the right toolbar, and you like for fonts, and then you select the color slider option, and then choose the RGB slider from the drop-down menu, and the hex code will be at the bottom. These instructions will be available in the checklist, Creating Accessible Presentations checklist, when it is up on Accessible Libraries. To continue with color really quickly, never use color alone to convey the meaning of text, of something in your text. So one option to fix this is also adding symbols. So for example, the number of books purchased in March 2022 is in purple and enclosed in asterisks. Now, this is important because color may not be easily seen by those with low vision and those who experience color blindness, and screen readers and braille displays do not automatically announce a color change. So you might indicate something's important, but that won't show up to people who use some assistive technologies. All right, sorry, I'm rushing through this. We've got a lot of information. So we've decided on the color of the font. Let's format it. So the big thing is use a really large font, as large as you can. So we recommend 20 points or larger. And this also helps with the information on the screen. Like if you're using a large font, you're not going to be able to have too much information on the screen. We suggest you use a sans serif font like Arial or Verdana. These are just a lot easier to read. They're less visually confusing when the serif isn't there. Ensure there's a lot of line spacing and a lot of white space. Limit or avoid the use of all caps, which can be really difficult to read. And then for the slides, we suggest aligning all the text to the left when possible, especially for large chunks. The other alignments just aren't as accessible for like a lot of information. If you want to center your title, that will be fine. But yeah, we suggest just defaulting to always aligning to the left. Okay, so we had the opportunity, this is awesome. We had our expert accessibility testers with lived experience of a disability share their thoughts on different font attributes in presentations. Sorry. We do note that these are just their experiences and opinions. And they do not speak for all people with disabilities. But there are commonalities between their recommendations and on how to make a great presentation, and we thought it would be really helpful. So much like the last screen, their preferences are to always use a sans serif font. The text should be as large as possible, always. Use a regular or a bolded font when applicable. Toby's going to talk a little bit about that later. And use a white text on a black background or vice versa. All right, so we've got the layout, we've got the font. Now let's talk about writing the content very quickly. So just keep it simple, use plain and simple language in your presentation, avoid jargon. Always spell out acronyms when you use them. So for example, when I was talking about the contrast ratio, I was also talking about the web content accessibility guidelines. And then I said WCAG, right? So just always do that first. Use an inclusive language. So use everyone instead of hey guys. And then determine the language preference of your audience. So for example, when talking about disabilities, we and accessibility libraries uses person first language, which emphasizes the person. So this would be like a person with a disability, instead of identity first language, which, for example, would be a dyslexic person. Everyone's preferences differ. Like everyone, yeah. So asking them is really important of what they prefer, because like everyone's different in their preferences. It's actually really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so with that simple and clear information that you have crafted, we suggest you use lists to organize it. Lists are very, very helpful in slides. They break in the information into chunks of consumable content, which screen readers can really easily navigate through. However, please never, never, never manually create your lists. Always use the direct formatting option in the toolbar. Manually created lists are just a little bit just chaos. So they're really difficult to navigate through. They can be confusing, and then you have to add extra formatting. It's just direct formatting your list is the way to go there for accessibility. Okay, so defining the languages of the text. Like this is if you're doing something in two languages, or if you have something like a quote that may be in French, for example, um, we suggest you define the language of that quote, in this case. So text marked up by different languages will be recognized by screen readers and pronounced correctly. Excuse me. So you don't need to, I will note, you don't need to define the language of like singular words or like short words. For example, in the sentence, she had déjà vu, you wouldn't need to mark up French for déjà vu. But if it's a sentence or more, we suggest you mark it up. It would just help the screen reader trying to pronounce French as English. If it's not marked up, is just, yeah, it just doesn't work. So yeah, so you can mark up your language in PowerPoint and Google Slides of just select text quite easily. So in PowerPoint, you just highlight the text, you go under File, Tools, Language, and then choose the language of that chunk of text that you've highlighted. In Google Slides, you highlight the text and select File, Language, and choose language of the text. In Keynote, you can't just mark up the language of a specific chunk of text. You can change the language of the full presentation. So if you're presenting in a different language, French, for example, but maybe it's set to English, you can change the language of the presentation by going File, Advanced, Language Region, and then choosing that language. Okay, so last slide before the lovely, amazing demonstrations. So accessible hyperlinks. This one's a little trickier in presentations. Like first, to be accessible, the hyperlinks need to be informative for users with assistive technologies who navigate using links. So for example, like click here is not informative. If you navigate by links, you're just gonna hear a bunch of click here's and no like none of the context. So those aren't helpful. Now for presentations, you need to use, or you generally use the URL because it's for an audience, and like an informative link text doesn't really work when you're presenting. So in that case, we suggest you use like the shortest URL possible, and use a camel case format, which is not going to affect the URL. So like, for example, on the slide is accessiblelibraries.ca. That's that full, writing that into the, like your browser will get you to the website, and the A and the L are capitalized. So it's easier to read on the screen. For digital handouts of your presentation, that's when you need to switch over to using informative text. So, for example, visit the Accessible Libraries website. If you're navigating by link and you hear the link Accessible Library website, you know exactly where that's going to take you. And that just makes it easier to move through. Okay, so we are now at our first demonstration by Toby. He's going to present how, from the perspective of a person with low vision, how inaccessible presentations can be. Toby, I'll stop sharing my screen and you can take it away.
Hello. Thank you for joining me here. It says you cannot start screen share and while other participant is sharing.
Oh, I'm not sharing anymore. Maybe try again. Okay, there it works now.
Oh, yeah. Are you seeing my? I'm sharing my screen now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, thanks for joining me today. I want to move through this fairly quickly. I come to this with a vested interest for a couple of reasons. I have lifelong experience with a visual impairment. In my case, it's high myopia, which is basically being very, very nearsighted. I have to hold things close in order to see them. So for a bit of context, we're all familiar with 20/20 vision, considered normal vision, which if in a room full of people who have 20/20 vision, everyone can see an object that's 20 feet away with about the same sharpness and clarity. So from in my case, to see an object that's 20 feet away looks like it's 140 feet away. Or stated otherwise, if in order to see an object that's 140 feet away, I have to get up to about 20 feet from it. Which the reason I'm giving all this information is that it provides a bit more context in terms of what it means to be at a presentation where the slides aren't accessible. And I have to say, the information I'm giving here is really, I'm thinking about being in a live presentation, not so much online, but I'll talk about that a bit. So like many of you here as well, I've presented, you'd never guess it by my presentation here today, but presented it and I've also spent some time as an audience member in presentations where I wasn't able to see the slides. And but I also have an understanding of how challenging it is to create slides that are fully accessible. And as a starting point, even this slide design that we have here, which has been put together with the W3C guidelines in mind, for me, I prefer it like this, which is just everything's just a little bit bigger. And I use a slightly different font. In this first version is not by any means a deal breaker for me, especially online. But I know that in a room, I'd really want to be sitting close, or ideally have it a little bit larger. And just thinking about what Megan was saying about there, I just say that the slides that follow play very fast and loose as far as accessibility goes. It's really, it would be an insult for my colleagues who rely on screen readers to go through the files that are to follow, the slides that are to follow. So I'd like to take a couple looks at slides, some examples I was given of slides that could use a makeover. In this case, color contrast is the main issue. I don't find the title bad, the heading, but that 01 behind it is really problematic. I don't know if you can see, like I'm magnifying my screen right now. I kind of have to like zoom in pretty far to see this. If I was in a room looking at this, it would be extremely difficult. Also, this font, this is an example of while it's kind of retro cool, this American typewriter font, It's also what I would say old school, inaccessible. So not being a designer, I just stripped down the content a little bit and just bolded everything and made it larger. It might not maintain the integrity of the original creator, but it's certainly easier to read. However, I'll say that with this larger font and bolder font, it can handle, to my eye anyway, the background color, and in some ways, I find it preferable because sometimes a white slide, particularly if you're in a big room and something's being projected, can be pretty supersonic on your eyes. It can be pretty intense for anyone. Here's another example of a slide where there's a few issues here. Again, we have, but mainly being, as the title says, too much information. There's an unfortunate font size, but for me, it's the table on the right side. I have never met a table that I've liked in a presentation. I have to say that tables graphics can be really problematic. In this case, even I've now made it into a full slide. Even this, quite frankly, even on my computer screen, it's difficult to see. Now here's the same slide. I've added a bit of, tightened up the graphics and made it a little significantly more contrast. In a presentation, I might be able to see it, but my preference would be to have it as an electronic file. And this is like a key to it being, having most inclusive and effective way to make a presentation accessible is to make sure that everyone can get the files in advance, which is a challenge. I was doing this to the last minute before meeting you people. But ideally, I want to have it in my hand, and I want to have it on a device where I can look at it close, and it's really the only way that I can participate. So just a couple of final thoughts. To reiterate some of what Megan said, just slides that are as lean with as clean a layout as possible in a sans serif font, size large as much as you can, with good contrast. I would suggest that even if you're presenting online, design presentations that are intended for an in-person audience. I think it keeps people's content cleaner. I know for myself, it seems that I have a bad habit of putting too much info in a slide when I think it's going to be just viewed online. And also preview your slides in advance on a big screen is also very informative. And yes, again, electronic handouts in advance, if at all possible, please, and thank you. That's all I had to share.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Toby. Melody is now going to demonstrate how screen readers navigate through inaccessible and accessible presentation. Melody, if you want to share your screen.
All right. So I'm going to share the sound as well, just so you have an idea of what is actually going on and what I'm hearing. Everyone able to hear and see my...
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yes.
I'm also going to turn it down so then people can actually understand what is going on.
PowerPoint slide shows
Okay,
the participant.
so I am now, I can see the slideshow. So first of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Melody, and I'm one of the tester at NNELS. And my vision is not measurable. I can see like I have light perception. I can see like if I'm just about to walk into a tree or a pole, I can't tell the difference which one is which, but yeah, I kind of have an idea something's right in front of my space. But for how fast I walk, sometimes it's usually too late by the time I see it. And so it's pretty funny when just before Toby started sharing about his stuff, that Megan mentioned that we're here to see how inaccessible presentation can be. But like what I'm about to show you is definitely not at all close to the worst presentations I've seen. So I'm gonna start here.
An example of what not to do.
So this is the title of the slides. I don't actually have a way to tell that it is actually meant to be the title, except for the context. But
March 16th,
and I see the
2022.
dates here.
Picture placeholder, a picture containing wooden
Oh,
binding
well,
tool, broom.
So this is a little too good for an inaccessible presentation, as the picture is labeled with alt text.
Blank. Description automatically generated. An inaccessible presentation.
And yeah, it shows that it is an inaccessible presentation. I'm sure there are some other things that you could do better, but if this is what I got from a very like general audience, I honestly wouldn't even bother complaining.
An inaccessible presentation.
All right.
Slideshow slide 2.
Slide
Agenda.
2.
Agenda 01. Agenda. 01 color contrast. 02 too much information.
Okay.
03 formatting and readability. 3/16/2023.
So you can see that the content is actually readable. The date is kind of mislocated. I don't know where it actually is on the screen.
2.
And there's a 2, which my guess is that it's meant to be the slide number, but it's again the reading order is incorrect. But at least I can still kind of read everything.
2.
So there we go.
01 color
What else?
contrast.
So there's color
The color contrast is extremely poor. It has a contrast ratio of 2.79. 1.
Hey.
It should be 4.5. 1 to pass WCAG AAA standards.
Okay. So my screen reader would read this whole thing as a very long one line. But in a presentation, it's like not even just for accessibility. I'd say it's just best practice to, chop things up into tiny little bullet points, just for just so your whoever you're presenting to are not gonna be too busy looking at the screen and miss what you're actually trying to say.
For more information about WCAG color contrast, https://www.w3.org/way/WCAG21/Quickriff/show techniques=1.
Link. Again, it's not actually labeled as a link. And like Megan just mentioned, if I were to receive this, I will like the link to be actually labeled, or at least be shortened and on its own line.
3/16/2023.
There's
Picture placeholder eyeglass. Picture
the date and the number is here in a weird place again. But again, the pictures are labeled, and that is, I'd say, like you're kind of 80% of the way there already.
3/16/2023 4022 too much information.
Okay.
024. 3/3/
Again, this is a very inconsistent order of where things
4.
are.
022 O-stroke in a 2021 O-stroke. The services selected were O-stroke.
And that is a strange character for like I can tell that it's trying to be a list but failing. Again, like formats are there for a reason. Don't even try to
Allison Ball has left.
Don't even try to like make your own thing. Like templates are there for good reasons. You don't need to be creative. Creative on like the content, not the design of your presentations. Like a lot of these overlap with when you're designing a website or anything else, any apps, like anything that you're trying to present to like your audience.
O-Stroke Reference Services and Readers Advisory.
Keep going.
O-Stroke Borrowing Digital
Okay,
Materials.
and so like I see these are like a good amount of content on the page. My only complaint here would be it's a sad list.
Picture abstract blurred public library with bookshelves 03 formatting and
Okay.
readability. 03 picture abstract
This is
blurred public
a picture. I'm sure it looks right somehow, but the first thing I see is a picture
03
which is labeled, and I'm not sure what 03 is supposed to mean.
formatting and readability.
And here's the title.
Formatting and readability. Formatting and readability.
And that's all I see.
Formatting 0 form.
So I'm not sure what else is on the screen, but I'm sure I'm missing something.
3/16/2006. The inaccessible features of this presentation include.
All right, so here is a list of all the inaccessible features in this presentation. You can probably see it here. So I'd say like the best way to look at it is to treat your audience like kids, as in this is a strange analogy, I think, but make your presentations like you're making a like little picture books. You might only want like one sentence or a tiny little list on your page plus a very clear picture, so your audience can actually focus on one thing and one thing only. And like it's easier for the presenter to like as like a very general like reminder to focus on, you know, the one thing you're talking about, and not having to look back on the screen all the time for like what is the next tiny little bit of this one slide. But yeah, like I'm gonna talk a little bit about how a presentation could be worse. So
Ryan, accessible.
So my worst experience with PowerPoint slides are at universities. A lot of professors don't really put a lot of effort into making their presentations accessible. I'm not even gonna talk about how like I don't get it before class, and so I usually don't know what they're talking about. But to modify their slides, a lot of times it would just stick a new image on to an existing presentation and call it a day. And like there end up being like layers and layers of just images that are not labeled, and I have no idea what is important and what is visible. So excuse me for the background. I'm actually at my school right now, so sorry. But a lot of times, like I don't even have a place to start looking. So that is basically all I have today. If you want to hear more of my complaints, come talk to me. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Melody. I promise next time I'm going to try and make those slides as inaccessible as possible. So thank you so much. Oh, here.
Did my thing stop?
Yeah, you're
Very
yeah.
cool.
Just quickly share the final. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, for attending this webinar. We crammed a lot of information into the last 40 minutes. The next webinar, we're talking about presentation features and tools. And in that webinar, we'll talk a little bit more. We'll talk more about tables and reading order and handouts, accessible digital handouts of your presentation. So I think it's going to be a good one. So we hope you have a chance to join us.